Jenny believed that moving to India would finally bring peace to her relationship with Sumit. After years of long-distance love, heartbreak, cultural differences, and family pressure, she felt that this was the moment everything would finally fall into place. She had packed up her life, left behind familiar streets and friends in America, and stepped into a completely different world. For Jenny, this wasn't just a trip. This was a leap of faith. She was ready to start a new life with the man she loved more than anything. But the moment she arrived and the first few days began unfolding, it quickly became clear that reality would be far more complicated than the dream she had imagined. The first morning in India felt magical. Jenny woke up early as the sunlight slowly filled the small apartment she now shared with Sumit outside. The sound of distant traffic mixed with the calls of street vendors and birds. It was different from the quiet morning she was used to in America, but in a strange way it felt exciting. She sat up in bed, looked around the room, and smiled. This was it. She was finally here. No more video calls, no more waiting months to see each other. She and Sumit were finally together in the same place, building a life side by side. But Sumit did not seem as relaxed as Jenny expected. While she was enjoying the moment, he was already pacing around the room. His phone buzzed repeatedly, and each time he checked it, his expression changed slightly. Jenny noticed the tension immediately. She had known Sumit long enough to understand his moods. Something was bothering him. She asked him if everything was okay. At first he tried to brush it off with a small smile, saying it was nothing serious. But Jenny wasn't convinced. She could tell he was hiding something. Finally, after a long pause, Sumit admitted that his parents were still extremely upset about their relationship and that they had been calling him repeatedly. Jenny felt a familiar knot in her stomach. The issue with Sumit's family had followed them like a shadow for years. Every time it seemed like things might calm down, another confrontation would happen. She had hoped that by living together openly, things would eventually settle. But hearing that his parents were still angry made her worry that the drama was far from over. Sumit explained that his parents felt embarrassed in front of their relatives and neighbors because of the relationship. In their culture, marrying someone much older and from another country was not something they easily accepted. For them it was not only a family issue but also a social one. People around them constantly asked questions, made comments, and criticized their decisions. This pressure had built up over time and now it was exploding again. Jenny tried to stay calm. She told Sumit that she loved him and that they had already overcome so many obstacles together. She believed they could survive this one too. But deep inside she was nervous. She had moved across the world for him. If his family refused to accept her completely, their life in India could become extremely difficult. The day continued with small moments of happiness mixed with growing tension. Jenny tried to focus on settling into the apartment. She arranged the kitchen, unpacked her clothes, and looked around the neighborhood from the balcony. Everything felt new and unfamiliar, but she was determined to make it work. Meanwhile, Sumit continued receiving calls from his parents. Each conversation left him more stressed. Jenny could see it in the way he sighed, the way he rubbed his forehead, the way he avoided eye contact after hanging up the phone. Eventually, she asked him directly what his parents were saying. Sumit hesitated before answering. Then he told her something that made the situation even more serious. His parents wanted to meet them immediately. They were angry and demanded an explanation for why Sumit was still living with Jenny despite their strong objections. Jenny's heart started beating faster. She remembered the last time she had faced Sumit's parents. The confrontation had been emotional and painful. His mother had been particularly upset, expressing deep disappointment and frustration. Jenny had tried to explain her love for Sumit, but it seemed like nothing she said could change their minds. Now the thought of another confrontation made her anxious. But at the same time, she knew that avoiding the situation wouldn't help. If they were going to build a future together, they would eventually need to face the family conflict head-on. A few hours later, as the sun began setting and the evening lights of the city started glowing outside, the tension inside the apartment grew even heavier. Jenny and Sumit were sitting quietly in the living room when suddenly there was a loud knock on the door. Both of them froze. Sumit slowly stood up and walked toward the door. Jenny could see the worry in his eyes. Before he even opened it, he already suspected who might be standing outside. When he opened the door, his fear became reality. His parents were standing there. The moment they stepped inside, the entire atmosphere changed. The air felt thick with emotion. No one smiled. No one greeted each other warmly. Instead, there was a heavy silence that made every second feel longer than usual. Sumit's mother looked around the apartment with a serious expression. Her eyes briefly landed on Jenny, but there was no sign of acceptance. For Jenny, that look alone was enough to understand that this conversation was not going to be easy. Sumit tried to start calmly. He asked his parents to sit down and said they should talk peacefully. But the tension was already too strong. His father spoke first, asking direct questions about why Sumit continued living with Jenny despite knowing how upset the family was. He reminded Sumit about his responsibilities and about how their community viewed the situation. Jenny listened quietly at first. She understood that family expectations were very important in Indian culture, but hearing them speak about her as if she were the cause of all the problems hurt deeply. Sumit tried to defend their relationship. He explained that he loved Jenny and that they had already sacrificed a lot to be together. He wanted his parents to understand that his happiness mattered too. But his mother was not convinced. Her voice grew emotional as she described the stress the situation had caused their family. She said that neighbors and relatives constantly asked questions about Sumit and Jenny. She said people judged them and that it brought shame to the family. Jenny felt tears forming in her eyes, but she tried to stay strong. She didn't want to appear disrespectful or aggressive. Instead, she spoke softly, explaining that she truly loved Sumit and never intended to hurt anyone. For a brief moment, the room became quiet again. It almost felt like the tension might calm down. But then the conversation took another unexpected turn. Sumit's mother suddenly asked a question that stunned everyone in the room. She asked Sumit if he was truly ready to choose Jenny over his own family. The question hung in the air like a storm cloud. It was the kind of question that could change everything. Sumit looked down at the floor, clearly struggling with the weight of the moment. Jenny watched him anxiously, knowing that whatever he said next could determine the future of their relationship. The silence stretched for several seconds. Jenny's heart was racing. Sumit finally lifted his head and took a deep breath. What he said next would shock everyone. The room fell completely silent after Sumit's mother asked the question that everyone feared. Are you ready to choose Jenny over your own family? The words hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Jenny could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She had always known that Sumit was caught between two worlds, but hearing the choice spoken out loud made everything feel far more serious. Sumit looked down at the floor for several seconds. His hands were shaking slightly. He loved Jenny deeply, but he also loved his parents. In Indian culture, family loyalty runs deep, and going against your parents can create a wound that never truly heals. Finally, Sumit lifted his head slowly and spoke in a quiet but determined voice. He said that Jenny was the person he wanted to spend his life with. The moment those words left his mouth, the tension in the room exploded. His mother's expression changed instantly. She looked shocked, angry, and hurt all at once. His father leaned back in his chair with a heavy sigh, as if he had just heard something he never wanted to hear. Jenny felt a mix of relief and fear. Relief because Sumit had defended their relationship, but fear because she knew the reaction from his parents would be intense. His mother began speaking rapidly, her voice filled with emotion. She said that Sumit was making a huge mistake and that he didn't understand how much pain this decision was causing the family. She talked about the embarrassment they faced from relatives, the gossip from neighbors, and the constant questions from friends. According to her, their family name had become the subject of endless discussion because of Sumit's relationship with Jenny. Jenny tried to remain calm, but the situation was becoming overwhelming. She had never wanted to be the reason a family felt broken. All she wanted was to live peacefully with the man she loved. She gently explained that she respected Sumit's parents and that she truly hoped one day they could accept her. But the words did little to soften the tension. Sumit's father then spoke in a slow, serious tone. He told Sumit that life is not only about love but also about responsibility and respect for family traditions. He reminded him that parents sacrifice many things to raise their children and that those sacrifices should never be forgotten. The message was clear. They believed Sumit was choosing selfish happiness over family duty. Sumit felt the pressure building from every direction. He tried to explain that he wasn't rejecting his family, but simply asking them to accept the woman he loved. But each attempt at explanation seemed to make the argument even worse. His mother stood up suddenly and began walking around the room, clearly unable to contain her frustration. She pointed toward Jenny and said that this relationship had already caused too many problems. She insisted that if Sumit continued down this path, he would lose the support of his family completely. Jenny felt a wave of sadness wash over her. Hearing those words made her realize just how serious the situation had become. She glanced at Sumit, hoping he might find a way to calm things down. But Sumit himself looked torn apart by the conflict. For years he had struggled between his love for Jenny and the expectations of his family, and now the two sides were colliding again in front of him. The conversation continued to escalate. Voices grew louder. Emotions became stronger. What started as a discussion was now turning into a full-blown confrontation. Sumit tried again to explain that Jenny had sacrificed everything to move to India. She had left her home, her friends, and the comfort of her old life. All she wanted was to build a future with him. But his parents were not ready to accept that explanation. To them, the relationship still felt wrong and unnatural. The age difference, the cultural gap, and the public attention surrounding their story made it extremely difficult for them to accept. Eventually, the argument reached a breaking point. Sumit's mother said something that shocked both of them. She declared that if Sumit continued living with Jenny, the family would no longer support him financially or emotionally. It was an ultimatum. Jenny felt her stomach tighten. She never wanted Sumit to lose his family because of her. The idea that he might have to choose between love and family was heartbreaking. Sumit looked stunned. Even though the conflict had been building for years, hearing the threat spoken out loud still hit him hard. He tried to reason with them again, asking them to understand that he was not abandoning them. But his parents seemed convinced that their son was slipping away from the values they had raised him with. After several more tense minutes, Sumit's father stood up slowly and told them that they needed time to think about the situation. His mother was still visibly upset, but she followed him toward the door. Before leaving, she looked back at Sumit and repeated that he needed to make the right decision before it was too late. The door closed behind them, and the apartment fell into a heavy silence. Jenny sat quietly on the couch, trying to process everything that had just happened. Sumit remained standing near the door, staring at the floor. The confrontation had drained both of them emotionally. After a long moment, Jenny walked over and gently placed her hand on Sumit's arm. She told him that she didn't want him to lose his family because of her. But Sumit shook his head slowly and said that the situation was more complicated than that. He loved his parents, but he also believed that everyone deserved the right to choose their own partner. The two of them sat down together, talking quietly about what might happen next. They both knew that the conflict with his parents was far from over. In fact, this confrontation might have only been the beginning of a much bigger storm. Jenny wondered if she would ever truly feel accepted in India. Sumit wondered whether he would ever be able to balance his love for Jenny with the expectations of his family. Outside, the sounds of the busy city continued as if nothing had happened, but inside the apartment everything had changed. Their relationship had survived many challenges before, but the events of these first few days had made one thing very clear. The path ahead would not be easy. And if the tension between Jenny, Sumit, and his family continued to grow, the drama that was about to unfold could be even more explosive than anything they had experienced before. The silence that followed after Sumit's parents left the apartment felt heavier than the argument itself. Jenny sat quietly on the edge of the couch, staring at the floor, replaying every word that had just been said. The confrontation had drained her emotionally. She had come to India believing this move would finally stabilize their relationship, but instead it felt like everything had become even more complicated. Sumit stood near the door for a long moment before slowly walking back into the living room. His face looked tired and stressed, as if the pressure from his family had suddenly doubled. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt thick with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Jenny broke the silence in a soft voice, asking Sumit if he was okay. Sumit gave a small nod, but it was obvious he wasn't. He sat down beside her and ran his hands through his hair, trying to calm his racing thoughts. The argument with his parents had forced him to face the reality that the conflict wasn't going away anytime soon. Jenny gently told him that she never wanted him to lose his family because of her. Hearing that made Sumit look at her with a mix of gratitude and sadness. He explained that the situation wasn't as simple as choosing one side over the other. He loved his parents and respected them deeply, but he also believed that he had the right to decide who he wanted to spend his life with. Jenny understood his struggle, but she also knew that the tension with his family could affect every part of their life in India. That night the two of them talked for hours about their future. They discussed whether moving to another city might help reduce the pressure from his parents. They talked about finding stable jobs, building a peaceful routine, and proving to everyone that their relationship was real and serious. But even as they made these plans, there was still uncertainty hanging over everything. The next morning, Jenny woke up earlier than usual. Her mind was still filled with the events from the night before. She walked into the small kitchen and started preparing tea, hoping that a calm morning might help them reset after such an intense confrontation. When Sumit joined her, he looked slightly more relaxed than the previous night. For a brief moment, it felt like they might finally get a chance to enjoy their life together without constant drama. They decided to go out for a short walk around the neighborhood. Jenny wanted to explore more of the area and get a better sense of her new environment. As they walked through the busy streets, she noticed the vibrant colors of the shops, the smell of spices from nearby food stalls, and the constant movement of people everywhere. India felt alive in a way that fascinated her. Despite the tension with Sumit's family, she still wanted to give this new life a real chance. However, their peaceful walk didn't last long. While they were sitting at a small roadside cafe drinking tea, Sumit's phone suddenly rang again. The moment he looked at the screen, his expression changed. Jenny immediately recognized the look on his face. It was his parents again. Sumit hesitated for a moment before answering the call. Jenny watched quietly as he stepped aside to talk. From the tone of his voice, she could tell the conversation wasn't friendly. After a few minutes, he returned to the table looking frustrated. Jenny asked what happened, and Sumit explained that his parents were still extremely upset after the confrontation. They believed he had disrespected them by defending Jenny and refusing to end the relationship. Jenny felt her chest tighten again. It seemed like the conflict was escalating faster than either of them expected. Sumit admitted that his parents might try to involve other relatives in the situation to pressure him even more. In many traditional families, decisions are not only discussed between parents and children, but sometimes involve the wider family network as well. Hearing this made Jenny realize that the problem could soon grow much bigger than just a disagreement with his parents. As the day continued, Sumit became quieter and more withdrawn. Jenny could see that he was deeply worried about what might happen next. Later that evening, as they returned to the apartment, another unexpected surprise was waiting for them. A neighbor approached Sumit and asked him about the argument that had happened the previous night. Apparently, the raised voices had been heard by people in the building. News about the confrontation was already spreading through the neighborhood. Jenny felt embarrassed and uncomfortable. She didn't like the idea of strangers discussing their private problems. Sumit tried to brush it off politely, but the moment made it clear that their situation was becoming public gossip. Back inside the apartment, Jenny sat quietly for a while before speaking again. She told Sumit that if his family truly refused to accept her, they might need to think carefully about their future in India. She didn't want him to feel trapped between two impossible choices. Sumit listened carefully and then told her something that surprised her. Despite the conflict, he still believed that with time his parents might slowly soften their position. In the past they had reacted strongly to their relationship, but sometimes after time passed they became calmer again. Jenny wasn't sure if she felt the same optimism, but she appreciated his hope. The evening passed slowly as they tried to relax by watching television and cooking dinner together. Small normal moments like these reminded them why they had fought so hard to be together in the first place. But even during those calm moments, the shadow of family drama still lingered in the background. Just as they were about to go to bed, Sumit's phone buzzed again with a message. This time it wasn't from his parents. It was from another relative who had apparently heard about the situation and wanted to talk. Sumit looked at the message and sighed deeply. Jenny could see the exhaustion in his eyes. The drama that began during Jenny's first days in India was spreading faster than either of them expected. What had started as a private family disagreement was now turning into a much larger conflict involving relatives, neighbors, and possibly the entire community. As Jenny turned off the lights and lay down beside Sumit, she couldn't stop thinking about the uncertain future ahead. She had come to India believing she was stepping into a love story. Instead, it felt like she had stepped into the center of a storm that was only beginning to grow stronger. And if the tension continued to escalate, the next chapter of Jenny and Sumit's journey might become even more dramatic than anyone imagined. The message Sumit received that night kept both of them awake longer than they expected. The name on the phone belonged to one of Sumit's uncles, someone who rarely contacted him directly. That alone made the situation feel more serious. Jenny watched quietly as Sumit read the message again. His expression looked tense and uncertain. When she asked what it said, Sumit explained that his uncle wanted to meet him the next day to talk about the situation. The words sounded calm, but both of them understood what it really meant. The family conflict was spreading. What started as a disagreement between Sumit and his parents was now becoming a larger family discussion. Jenny felt a deep sense of worry settle in her chest. She had hoped the drama might slowly fade away after the confrontation with his parents, but now it seemed like the opposite was happening. Sumit tried to reassure her that it might not be as bad as it seemed. He said that sometimes older relatives in the family try to act as mediators during conflicts. Maybe his uncle simply wanted to help calm things down. Jenny nodded, trying to stay hopeful, but she couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling growing inside her. The next morning arrived quickly. Neither of them had slept very well. Sumit looked tired as he got ready to leave the apartment. His uncle had asked to meet him at a small cafe not far from where his parents lived. Jenny offered to come with him, but Sumit gently told her it might be better if he spoke with his uncle alone first. He didn't want the situation to become even more complicated. Jenny agreed, though the thought of waiting alone made her nervous. After Sumit left, the apartment felt strangely quiet. Jenny walked around slowly, trying to distract herself by organizing things in the kitchen and cleaning the living room. But her mind kept drifting back to the family drama. She wondered what Sumit's uncle would say. Would he pressure Sumit to end the relationship? Would he demand that Jenny leave India? Or could he actually help the family understand their love story? Meanwhile, Sumit arrived at the cafe and found his uncle already waiting for him at a corner table. The older man greeted him calmly, but his serious expression made it clear that the conversation would not be simple. They ordered tea and sat down across from each other. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, the uncle began explaining that Sumit's parents had been extremely upset since the confrontation the previous night. According to him, they felt deeply hurt and believed their son had publicly rejected their authority. Sumit listened quietly, knowing that this reaction was not entirely surprising. His uncle continued speaking, explaining that many relatives were now discussing the situation and trying to figure out what should happen next. Some family members believed Sumit should respect his parents' wishes and end the relationship. Others believed he should be allowed to make his own decisions as an adult. The family itself was divided. Hearing this made Sumit realize that the drama had grown bigger than he imagined. The uncle then leaned forward slightly and asked Sumit a direct question. He asked whether Sumit truly believed that his future with Jenny would bring him happiness despite all the conflict it had created. Sumit took a deep breath before answering. He said that his relationship with Jenny had already survived years of challenges. They had faced distance, criticism, misunderstandings, and constant pressure, but they were still together. To him, that meant their connection was real and worth fighting for. His uncle listened carefully. Instead of arguing, he nodded slowly as if trying to understand Sumit's perspective. He explained that older generations sometimes struggle to accept changes in tradition, especially when those changes challenge cultural expectations. The age difference between Jenny and Sumit, the international aspect of their relationship, and the public attention surrounding their story had all made the situation harder for the family to accept. But he also admitted that forcing someone to give up love rarely brings peace. After a long conversation, the uncle finally offered a suggestion. He said that perhaps the best solution was patience. Instead of escalating the conflict further, Sumit should focus on building a stable life with Jenny and showing the family that their relationship was genuine and respectful. Over time, actions might speak louder than arguments. Sumit felt a small sense of relief hearing those words. It wasn't complete support, but it also wasn't rejection. The conversation ended on a calmer note than he expected. When Sumit returned home later that afternoon, Jenny immediately noticed the slight change in his mood. He seemed less stressed than before. She quickly asked how the meeting went. Sumit explained everything his uncle had said. Jenny listened carefully, feeling a mixture of hope and uncertainty. The idea that time might slowly soften the family's resistance sounded encouraging, but she also knew that change might take months or even years. As they talked about the meeting, another realization slowly settled in. Their relationship was no longer just about the two of them. It had become part of a larger story involving family expectations, cultural differences, and community pressure. If they wanted to succeed, they would need patience, strength, and trust in each other. Become even more complicated. Jenny agreed, though the thought of waiting alone made her nervous. After Sumit left, the apartment felt strangely quiet. Jenny walked around slowly, trying to distract herself by organizing things in the kitchen and cleaning the living room. But her mind kept drifting back to the family drama. She wondered what Sumit's uncle would say. Would he pressure Sumit to end the relationship? Would he demand that Jenny leave India? Or could he actually help the family understand their love story? Meanwhile, Sumit arrived at the cafe and found his uncle already waiting for him at a corner table. The older